there legends, welcome to this week's YouTube video, and we're on the beach this week and I want to show you how I shoot my motion blurs using the panning technique. So over the last few weeks I've shot a few of these and I get asked a little bit about how I do them, so I thought I'll make a little short tutorial on my 8 steps or 8 tricks, or I think 8 or 9 tricks that I have that I get going to get these happening the best I can get them anyway. Let's get started with my top 8 tips. Okay, so tip 1, it's probably the biggest tip that I reckon for getting correct motion blurs, or the best motion blurs you can get, and that's using a sturdy tripod with a panning head. So this head here on top of the tripod pans nice and smoothly. You can do them handheld, but you're not going to get as good results because there's no way that once you get this tripod all locked off in the right position that you'll be able to get that precise pan. And getting the precise pan is one of the most important parts of a motion blur when you're shooting out to a horizon, because you want that horizon nice and crispy and not like, you know, fuzzy and blurry. And if you're hand holding, the chances of you getting a fuzzy horizon is going to be quite apparent. So using a tripod is going to help, but there's no use using a tripod if it's not level. So you've got to make sure that your legs, so most tripods have got a spirit level, so you've got to make sure that bubble is dead set in the middle. So it's panning from right here, and as you pan from left to right or right to left, if that spirit level's in the middle, your horizon's going to stay dead straight the whole time. If you're using a tripod and that spirit level is not dead straight, well, your horizon's going to tilt and you're going to get that fuzzy horizon. So number 1 tip, use a tripod and make sure it is level. I actually also have this little level that clips onto the top of my camera, which I can check as well how level the camera is up the top. But this is the most crucial part, to be level, right there at the base. Okay, so the lens choice is also pretty important. I prefer using the 70-200 for mine. You want that sort of telephoto look for this. A wide angle will sort of catch too many things and warp the image. When I do it, I switch between the zoom of 70 and right up to 200 just to get different effects. And instead of using a prime lens, say like 100mm, the 70-200 is a little bit more versatile because I can get a lot of different looks in a short amount of time. So 70-200 is definitely my choice of lens for that. Today I'm using the 5D Mark III camera. I would usually use the EOS R these days, but I'm using that to film myself. So the 5D will do the trick just fine. Okay, so the next trick is to preset the focus. So I do in manual focus. So what I generally do is I take a look through the lens, I compose my image, I focus on the breaking wave in autofocus, and then I switch my lens to manual focus. Once it's in manual focus, it won't move from that distance that I've locked in, and as long as I don't move the tripod or move the focal length, well then it's going to be in a good focus distance. I also, with the 70-200 lens, I've got image stabilization, so I make sure that's actually turned to off, because you're going to be panning. You don't want to be confusing the image stabilization mode by trying to stabilize when you're moving. So if you've got image stabilization lenses, I'd suggest you turn it off. So yeah, manual focus, image stabilization off, and you're set to go. Okay, so the next step to consider, of course, is which mode you're going to shoot in. And I shoot these in full manual mode, but you can use TV mode or shutter speed preferred mode. My shutter speeds to start with, I set from 1 second to about 1/10 of a second, but I change in between, and then I get an aperture to suit whatever shutter speed that I want, and I always keep my ISO on 100. Because you're using such a slow shutter speed, your apertures are actually going to be quite small, so a high number. So normally this time of day, you're probably looking at f16 to f22 if you're shooting at a shutter speed of 1/4 of a second or something like that. Okay, so yeah, so manual mode or shutter speed preferred mode. If you're in shutter speed preferred mode, just select a shutter speed of 1/4 of a second. Have your ISO on 100, and the aperture will swing up and down to get you correct exposure. Step 5 is to compose your image so it looks nice, you know? So you don't want sort of, rarely, not always, but rarely do you want half water, half sky. I always either go for 3/4 sky, quarter water, or the opposite. Normally, I'm trying to get more sky with this shot and just get in the bottom of the bottom of the composure, the breaking wave, and then up into the sky. But play around with the composure, but make sure that is all set. Okay, step 6 is I use a cable release. I reckon this is an amazing tool. I think you can pick them up, the aftermarket ones, for about 30, 40 bucks maybe from any photography store. Just get the right one for your camera. And that clips into the side of my camera. So instead of using the shutter button to take my photo, I can use a cable release, which is good for any time you're using slow shutter. But also, because you've got your right hand moving, you're going to be panning with your right hand. I've got my left hand to click the button. So it just makes it easier and a little bit more technically perfect. All right, so step 7, we've got everything set up here. We've got our cable release, we've got our manual mode or shutter speed prefer mode, we've got our tripod nice and level. Now it's time to start panning and taking the shots. So for starters, I always go into live view mode so I can see on the back of my camera what I'm shooting at. So rather than looking through the viewfinder, I can just pan and look at the screen. Just makes it a little bit easier. So in my left hand, I've got my cable release. In my right hand, I start moving the pan in one motion. So have a practice before you even take a photo. Start further that way, to your left or to your right. And then halfway through the pan is when you click the button. Because then you get a nice smooth action. So instead of clicking the button at the start of the pan, it can get a bit jerky. So to get that nice smooth action, this is a really big tip. Make sure you're panning first, and then in the middle of your frame, take the picture. So it's a nice smooth pan. Nice smooth pan as you go. Okay, step 8 is about the breaking wave. So if you've got right hand waves breaking or left hand waves breaking, go with the direction that the whitewater is heading. So that makes for a nicer looking picture rather than going against the grain. So if a wave's breaking out here from left to right, I make sure I'm going with that whitewater. So it just looks smoother and it looks nice and neat. And if you can pan at the same speed as the breaking wave, well then it looks even crisper. So that's something to play around with as well. Okay, so step 9, or another thing to consider, would be to play around with shutter speeds. So if you're getting great shots at 1/4 of a second, that's great, but make sure you play around with it a bit. Like, we've got digital cameras, so take as many shots as you want and slow it down to 1 second and see if you get a better looking picture. 1 second's probably about as slow as I would go. Yeah, there's no reason why. Go up to 1/10 of a second, 1/8 of a second, 1 second, just play around and see how you go. So yeah, that wraps up 8 or 9 steps to get really cool motion blur shots. I reckon they look really good. I mean, I'll just take a picture to show you, just with exactly the same settings, but no pan. And we'll put that up on the screen and you'll see how boring that picture really is without the pan. It's still got the slower shutter speed, so it's still getting movement in the waves and all that, but without the pan, it just doesn't have that wow factor. So giving that pan definitely just gives another dimension to a slow shutter shot that's normally just taken stationary on the tripod. I've been taking these motion blurs for years. I used to do them in the days of slide film, where you had no instant reference and you didn't know how you were going, and you had to wait 2 or 3 weeks before you got your film back to find out how you did, and then you always forget what you did right and what you did wrong. So you can get really good now with digital cameras at motion blurs really quickly. So why not give them a go? They work on lots of different evenings. I like using them at sunset, normally on the East Coast, So the sunset behind me, and sometimes you get this beautiful pink glow, and it just gives it a nice soft musty look. And it also looks good in the morning actually. That vibrant morning look 15 minutes before the sunrise can really give a good look too. So either end of the day is when you obviously want to do these, because your shutter speeds will be low enough to you know, go for 1 second pans or 1/10 of a second pans. In the middle of the day, it's a different story. It can be done, but I might show you how to do that in another tutorial. But for now, try them at either dawn or dusk. If you're going to try them with a rising sun, so it depends where you are in the world, but if the sun's going to rise over the ocean, we'll make sure you're there at least 15 minutes before to do them. When the sun's setting behind you, you've got a little bit more time. You can do it 10 minutes before the sun sets to about 10 minutes, 15 minutes after the sun sets. So there's a few tips. That's this week's video. Like always, send through any questions or your suggestions. You might have some epic tips that you can add into the comments below. I'd love to hear them. And yeah, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.